Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Apex Podcast. As always, I am your host, Jan Almasy, and today we are going to be interviewing Mr. Max Kelbly. He's a 23-year-old multilingual, globe-trotting content creator and tradesman apprentice. Having studied history and the humanities between Africa, Europe, and North America during college, it comes as no surprise that Max founded the Edimus Max media outlet to promote the education of linguistics and symbolism in other fields, including psychology, marketing, theology, cinema, philosophy, and biology. Max firmly believes that anybody can acquire any language effectively with a simple, sustainable framework, as well as a basic understanding of how the brain processes language. His goal is to make language and education simple, fun, and practical for anyone of any lifestyle or background. Max has a strong passion for nature, nutrition, and athleticism with calisthenics, weightlifting, cooking, gardening, endurance cycling, and hiking. So with no further ado, Max, welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody.
How's it
Thank
going?
you for having me.
No
Not
problem.
too bad. Not too bad. Just enjoying the view.
Yeah. So you'd be like, welcome to Canton, right? Bliss Tower down here in downtown. Shout out to Steve Kuhn and everybody that developed this. So this building was actually like completely abandoned like 5-6 years ago. It was wild. This and the Onesto right next door. The Onesto used to be a hotel. It was actually built by a gentleman named Frank Onesto back in the day. And then this was the E.W. Bliss office building.
Okay, awesome.
And like 5-6 years ago, I think now, this block was completely undeveloped. And Steve had the vision to come in and turn this into the place that you're sitting in right now. So it's like super, super cool. Like,
Right.
What a guy. Great vision, especially for right in this area.
It's really awesome to see a lot of these old buildings, old factory buildings and everything in Akron and Canton be redeveloped and repurposed into something new. And
Yeah, I love it. The downtowns are definitely making a comeback, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to get out of that rabbit hole. My audience knows that I'm like notorious for going down rabbit holes. So to start off, why don't we just go through like a basic introduction of you, right? You're 22 years old. You just graduated from Walsh, which is my alumni as well. And you wrote a book. So let's just start with like where your Max is from.
So my name is Max Eli Kelbly. I'm from Marshallville, Ohio. It's just a little podunk little town, a little bit west of Canton, 700 people. We had a little elementary school, but it was torn down. And so it's a very tiny town. And so I've always grown up in a rural environment, and a lot of my family also lives in Cleveland. So I've been in between rural and more urban settings. And as for like education and everything, what I've done past few years, I spent 3.5 years at Walsh University studying history education. And then I quickly switched because I didn't want to be a teacher. Just really didn't want to deal with that. But I love kids though. I switched over to history and government and foreign affairs and communications as a minor. Really loved studying history and doing writing and speaking and learning how to do all the sorts of humanities related things. I focused a lot on the Middle East, and I really developed a love for languages and all sorts of stuff. I would consider myself a creative person, openness, personality. So I like writing. I really loved Legos when I was little, and then I got into Minecraft, and then when I kind of got not too mature for Minecraft because I'm not a very mature person, but
That's good though. That's
Right.
good. Trust me, like being inside the creative world, I feel like I still have Spider-Man pillows, bro. Like the worst thing that you can do is give up your childhood when it comes to being creative.
Right. I have a Spider-Man costume, so there you go.
Hell yeah.
But kind of when I went away from video games, I turned that passion for creativity into writing and video making. And so I have a YouTube channel, and I'm going to try to get a podcast to try to make a podcast, an affiliate with that called the Edimus Max podcast or Edimus Max YouTube channel. And like Jan said in the intro, that's mainly focused on like language and history and symbolism and all that sorts of stuff. But that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome, man. So, like coming from like I grew up in a rural town too,
Hmm.
right? And I think Canton South, we graduated with a little bit less than 100 kids, my senior class, and going from the rural side, my mom was a first generation immigrant, so I got to travel a lot as a kid, and bilingual. Like I know Slovak
Right.
and English,
Hmm.
and so I've also kind of experienced that. I feel like the bilingual gives you a little bit more of the wanderlust bug,
Right.
because you realize that there's entire communities of people that you cannot communicate with
Exactly.
unless you understand a language,
Hmm.
and how simple yet intricately complex of a barrier that is,
Yes.
to having access to minutiae of culture and depth that you would not otherwise be able to access just being an English speaker,
Right.
right? And I feel like kind of getting out of that town and then going around and starting to see the world a little bit and
Hmm.
really actually focusing on studying history and understanding that we're kind of weird as English speakers.
Yes.
Like it's very odd background. Like I'd love to start with just why is it such a pain in the ass for people that are English speakers to even learn other
Second
languages?
language.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a major focus of uh, the beginning part of my book. So I divide my book into three parts. In the first part, I kind of focus on that issue specifically, like what is going on in the United States, because some Americans don't realize that most other countries and cultures, people in those cultures and countries speak multiple languages just naturally.
Mm.
And other Americans see that as well and are kind of like, what's going on? Like you were saying.
Right.
Um,
Well, yeah, like all of my cousins in in Slovakia speak like Slovak, Polish, Russian, English,
right.
right? And then
Right.
like I speak Slovak, so I can understand Polish. It's kind of like speaking Slovak with marbles in your mouth. Um, and like all the Slavic languages come really close together. But
Right.
then
Right.
you have things like the Slavic languages and
Hmm.
the Romance languages, and then English is just kind of like, I'm here.
Exactly. Right. Right. So the reason why English speaking countries, like primarily English speaking countries, have this issue, and I'll focus on America first, just
Hmm.
explaining this, is because the United States is unprecedented historically and geographically. So America is a massive swath of land, and when European settlers were coming here, especially English speakers, um, they had all they're coming into these lands. Of course, there's Native American speaking Native American languages, but these settlers brought English primarily, and since there were other settlers with speaking other languages, of course, but because that was like the national language and the colonial language and all that,
It was like the language of the rising infrastructure.
right, right, and there wasn't any sort of language to fill this massive geographical gap. So
Right.
here we are 250 years later, and there's this giant swath of land, and Canada is the same way as well for the most part, where it's just massive swath of land with people that speak the same language and it's mutually understandable. And that's not really normal historically, even concurrently in most countries. So like Europe, you gave the example of Slovakia, and that's a good example. There's something I think of as like Africa, where like there's even more languages than there are in Europe in such even smaller.
Yeah, some of them are just divided by tribe.
Right, right.
Yeah, like I don't. I know one thing that I tell people that really surprises them a lot of the time is like, "Hey guys, like Slovakia is 2/3 the size of West Virginia."
Hmm.
Like I remember when I was a little kid, my grandma used to call all the time and be like, "Oh my God, there was an earthquake in California. Are you okay?" And my mom's like, "Yeah, mom, we're fine.
Right,
We're
right,
on the other side of the country. Like you could fit a whole Europe between us
right.
and California."
Hmm.
That's interesting. I never really thought about the fact that like the settlers would come in and that it would take over a large chunk of land,
Hmm.
but then also I kind of said, alluded to like the rising infrastructure and stuff.
Yeah.
But it like a lot of the colonial stuff is just like English is the proper language, and then any other language
Yeah.
that would be associated with the Native Americans would be
Hmm.
associated with savagery. And so it's like you don't want to learn that language. That's
Yeah.
savagery. And that kind of forgotten beauty is just kind of lost because of the mentality that maybe the settlers brought with them.
Right. And also, like, a lot of the Native Americans died out with their languages just largely from disease, even before, like, settlers got to places. And you see that in South America as well. Like, the diseases that got to the Incan Empire before the Spanish even made first contact with them. So, yeah, it's kind of like the perfect storm,
Right.
both in South America and North America, for like a single language to really have dominance.
Mm, mm. So, so then you have this massive swath of land.
Hmm.
There's a whole bunch of people that are speaking the same language, so they have no incentivization to learn anything
Exactly.
else.
Exactly.
And is that like kind of the root cause of it, or does it have to do with well, I guess not have to do, but is there another layer? Because I know that some of the English speakers that I know that have never spoken another language,
Hmm.
period, really, really hard for them to adjust their mouths in a way to pronounce certain words or to do certain
Right.
things, to mimic syllables or to mimic
Yes.
vowels and other stuff like that in Slovak.
Hmm.
Um, so you like have everybody knowing English, and then what about the English language specifically? Is there anything about the English language specifically that makes it harder for people to learn?
Well, I'll get to that in just 1 second. Another thing I wanted to add on that last part is not only is the big swath of land a very important factor in this, but also, like, the British Empire colonized 1/4 of the globe, so it made English this prominent language. So there's another
Ah.
incentive for Americans and English and Australians to not have to learn the language that
Yeah,
the
it's
rest
like
of the world
they
has already
made
learned.
English international right off the bat.
Right, right.
Hmm.
But for English, there are some strange parts of English pronunciations that not only English has, but English really is the only common language to have certain things, like the way we pronounce our R's. I think it's our R's are really abnormal, even, or specifically Americans as well, because like Australians, they kind of use like an H for an R sort of thing, like
Mhm.
uh, to say car keys, you would say cockies.
Right.
You got cockies and you cockies.
Right,
So
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it you have that. Also, English. What makes English hard is, I would say, the spelling and relating that to the pronunciation.
My mom hates that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she hates like the example she always gives, I think it's a meme now at this point, like is like Kansas and Arkansas. It drives her
Yes.
crazy.
Yeah.
She's like, why is it not Arkansas? When it comes to the pronunciation of the way the word looks.
Right. Right.
She used to call Cleveland Cleveland,
So it's a
instead
level
of
on.
Cleveland,
Right.
right? Or
Okay.
pineapple was Pineapple.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
I see. I see where she's coming from with the phonetics and everything.
yeah, and so it's like phonetically, it just doesn't make sense
Yeah.
to non-native English speakers.
No. No. And it's interesting. Well, the reason why English is not really phonetic is because it's an amalgamation of a bunch of different languages.
Hmm.
So you have French, and you have Old English, and you have Old Norse and Norman French, and all these different things converging in different time periods, and also them naturally evolving over time.
Hmm.
That causes a lot of pronunciation issues, and because anyone that looks at French that doesn't understand French will immediately see that you don't pronounce like a lot of the consonants.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take French words where you don't pronounce the consonants, and then you put it in a language where you do pronounce consonants, it's kind of a problem. So
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah,
So
that's part of it, but it's not all of it.
yeah, I'm like, I mean, there's so many different directions that I want to take that, but I'm gonna back it up for just a second so that we can give the audience a little bit more context
Mhm.
before we dive too much further down the rabbit hole.
All
Like,
right.
what being a history major
Mhm.
in government foreign affairs and everything else like that, why languages? Like, why do you think that you just got this itch to really kind of pursue and spend time manifesting a
Mhm.
book centered around language? Where did that come from?
It's interesting that you frame it like that with like my major and everything, because I think it doesn't really actually have much to do with my major. It was just how I came to my major and how I came interested in language were probably two different roads.
Mm,
And
mm,
I was always that guy that would like play on Duolingo, and like I think everyone kind of has an interest in learning another language, and that's kind of what I had. I was like, okay, I'll just do Duolingo. I'm gonna practice this for like an hour a day, and then after a week goes by, it's like, okay, I'm kind of done with this, and I'm not learning anything. But I really just wanted to find out, like, okay, I have friends that are fluent in multiple languages, and I want to know like what are the not only what they did, but because I think a lot of times we don't know how we learn things. So I wanted to learn how to learn a language so that I could better learn a language myself and then share that, because I've always liked sharing things I've learned. I've always been the fact guy, like actually, or
Right.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, that's a really, it's really interesting that you didn't link the major with the with like the personal calling, right? I mean,
Right.
like everybody always asks me like, why'd you go to nursing school? You own a marketing company. And I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know. You know, and like, that's what I was doing at the time. I wasn't
Exactly.
expecting to own a marketing company. Like it just
Right.
kind of happened.
Right.
But then I started going back and I started looking and I kind of went through a similar process where I was like, okay, why am I so good at this? Why does it come naturally? What am I doing? What did I learn to do in order to do this? And learning how to learn
Yep.
is kind of like a metaphysical, you know,
Yeah.
concept, but it's like, okay, there are steps. There are things that you can do to set yourself up in order to be successful in pursuing the task that you did. And that's something that like I encountered with the traditional agency model with marketing, where I was like, okay, none of this makes sense. Why are they doing it this way? How can I do it better? And you experience it with Duolingo. You're like, okay, this is making me bored. I'm not learning anything after a week. I'm not using it. There has to be a better way to do this.
Yeah.
And so like, what was the next thing? So like you got frustrated with Duolingo. You had all these friends that were bilingual or multilingual, and you were like, I want to be able to do that. What are they doing different? How did you start pursuing that path?
So what kind of happened next wasn't necessarily conscious, like a conscious decision that I'm
I
gonna.
love that you're gonna take it that direction.
I wasn't very conscious of like what I was doing. I just knew I kind of gut feeling I didn't like how languages were taught, especially like in schools.
Yeah.
And side story that converges with this is I've always wanted to write a book, probably past 8 years of my life, but I didn't really know how to do it. It wasn't like number one priority. And at this time, I never really
wanted to write a book since you were like 14, 15.
It's just like fiction and stuff.
That's
and
cool. Yeah, that's good though. I mean, that's
Right.
awesome that you were able to maintain that level of creative vision all the way through school.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so I didn't connect the language, wanting to learn a language or learn how to learn a language and writing a book, until there's this guy named Eric Koster, who is a professor at Georgetown University, English professor. And he reached out to me, I think it was like, it's got to be almost 3 years ago now, or maybe 2 years ago, on LinkedIn. And I had no idea who this guy was. And he just said, hey, I got this program where we take in like young people in college that want to be authors, and then we, make them authors, and we try to make the publishing experience simple. So we try to avoid the mistakes of first-time authors and have the knowledge of second-time authors with those mistakes in mind, and then apply it to first-time authors. So, okay, I was like, okay, I'm interested in this, and I didn't really have any book ideas or anything, but that's all he asked is like, are you interested? And I said yes, and I didn't hear from him at all for a year. And then out of the blue, I got this email, and a year later, and it was about the program, and it was more specific. And it's like, should I do this? He ignored me last time or something. Or maybe he didn't see my message.
Right.
And then, so I signed up and I filled out the little survey thing and the Google form. And then I went through this process with a bunch of other people my age, early 20s and even teenagers and stuff, to write a book. Dozens of people in my cohort, and then overall there's got to be hundreds of people that have published through New Degree Press. It's called the Creator Institute, and it's affiliated with Georgetown University. And then it's a different organization than New Degree Press, but they're all under the same house, so it's the same people and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So you said you didn't have any book ideas when you got into the course.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Let's start there and like keep rolling. So you got into a course, you had no idea what you were going to write, and then how did the idea for writing the book manifest itself to you?
So as that year passed on, I became more interested in languages, and a part of my major, government and foreign affairs, I was really interested in the Middle East and specifically Central Asia. And one language that's spoken there is Farsi. And I know quite a few people that have spoken Farsi or dialects of Farsi. So I thought, okay, well, I want to learn this a little bit. And also I want to learn some French because that's what I tried to learn in high school, and it's easier than Farsi and everything. So as I was learning them to like a beginner level, I was like, okay, well, I'll incorporate this into the book. Why don't I just write about languages and learning languages and try to, and this is where everything started coming to the forefront of my consciousness. Like, okay, so I don't like how people teach language, especially in America. How can I write a book that's not just like a normal guide? And at first I was just writing down stories and stuff because we were instructed to write down like little like stories or experiences or interviews we had and stuff like that, and cobble stuff together from there. And I just started writing down my experiences studying abroad and traveling abroad. And yeah, I quickly decided like, oh yeah, I could really take this into a direction with writing, and I can really write a lot about this. So I just kept writing and writing.
So do you remember like what like a couple of the first couple of stories were that you started compiling? Is there one that like sticks out to you as like, oh, this is my aha?
I don't know if there was an aha moment. I
Or
more
one of your favorite ones that you remember writing down.
one of the
in the
first
beginning.
ones I wrote down was my experience in Amsterdam. So a few years ago, I went like on a study abroad trip to study in Uganda, and after the trip was over, I made prior arrangements to stay in Europe because I was going to visit some family friends in the Czech Republic, and then Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, Czechoslovakia is like Slovakia that got all the infrastructure in the deal.
Yeah.
They got Prague. Not that we're bitter, but
that we could talk about the Czech Republic and Slovakia and everything, but the first thing I wrote about was Amsterdam and the Netherlands because that was where the layover was. I was there for 24 hours, and I really go into detail in the book about the story, and it's pretty awkward, and because I didn't know any Dutch or anything, and I didn't know that Dutch people know English. Like the literacy rate for English is like 93% in the Netherlands. It's ridiculous. Like it's,
nice.
I think the Netherlands even declared recently, the past few years, that English is no longer a foreign language. It's considered a native language because it's so prevalent.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, but I didn't know that, and I was by myself at this point. Everyone went off back to America, so I was like looking up on Google Translate, how do I say this, and I'm an introvert, so I was pretty shy. I was very shy at the time too, and I went up to a desk attendant.
You're a ballsy introvert then. Like if you're an introvert that's just like, yeah, bye everybody, I'm gonna hang out in the Netherlands.
Well, I wrote about that, and when I was writing, I really that kind of puzzled me because I realized that like I was very, very socially awkward and shy, and I'm still introverted, of course, but I was doing all this stuff that requires you not to be shy.
Yeah.
It was kind of like can't remember what it's called, but anyway, it
almost like you're like realizing another part of your consciousness that you didn't know existed prior.
Right.
Like for me, I know like getting into Apex and like really kind of pushing myself. There's a lot of people that think that I'm an extrovert. And I'm not.
You're an introvert?
I'm an introvert, 110%. I get my energy from that fireplace right there. Like you could literally ask anybody that's been involved with the company for any language period of time. There's a point in time where Jan reaches a point where he's just like, screw all of you. I'm going home. I'm sitting in my chair.
I totally know what you're talking
about. Drinking a glass of whiskey. I'm reading a book and putting my phone on Do Not Disturb.
Yep.
So it's like, I developed and I grew my extroverted muscle, is what I call it,
Yes.
over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can push myself out there to do that kind of stuff
Yep.
because I understand how it's beneficial to me, like on a
Mm-hmm.
social level. That
Right.
doesn't mean that I hate it
Yeah.
on a regular basis. And there's very few times that I get energy from being around people.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few people that I get energy from being around. The majority of the
Right.
time, it's solo. And I think there's a lot of creatives because we realize that in the silence is where God speaks.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get connected to the consciousness
Right.
that is trying to manifest itself to you.
Right.
And so we get really anxious when we're around people for too long because we're disconnected from that.
Mm-hmm.
And the only place that we can really find that is in the silence.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I totally agree with the silence. Like that's where all the important realizations I think are made. And I mean, it's good to listen to stuff and of course educate yourself on whatever topic, but I mean, you have to have that, you have to just kind of sit
yeah,
with
if
it.
you want to bring something truly creative into the world that like
Mhm.
is in and we just spent a little bit of time talking about creativity. I would love that. We like there's I think a misconception that people believe that creativity is truly original thought.
Mm.
And I don't necessarily believe that it's 100% original thought so much as it is the combination of items in an original way.
Right.
So it's like intellect is like the intellect is like giving yourself the tools
Mm-hmm.
to create.
Okay.
But if you're just constantly going to Lowe's and buying hammers and never actually building a house,
Yeah.
you're never going to have a house.
Right.
You have
Right.
at some point need to actually take all of the lumber, nails, hammers, and all the supplies that you've gathered and sit your ass on a plot of land
Right.
and build the damn thing. Like,
I think
but
that's
there's a lot of
wisdom.
people that get really, really
Right.
amped up and they feel like they're progressing by just going and buying a new hammer
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over again. And
Right.
every time I've made any type of creative leap in my career, it's been when I disconnect from podcasts. I'm not reading any articles. I'm not giving myself any inputs because if you're consuming, you can't produce.
Right.
I firmly believe that. If you are constantly consuming, you will never be able to truly produce.
Mm-hmm.
You have to cut off that consumption of exogenous information in order to
Yeah.
actually do something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you think about like your creative process, right? You said that like some of the most important realizations have come in the silence. Was it uncomfortable when you first started doing that to write the book? Like, what was it like when you first started sitting down alone and like thinking, "Wow, I'm going to write these stories down"?
I don't know if I can speak directly to the book, but I can speak to writing more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, you're totally right. Like, what if you always have stuff coming in, you're never going to be able to produce meaningfully. You can produce, but not necessarily meaningfully. And yeah, so
I totally got us off track of Amsterdam,
Yeah.
by the way, too. So like at some point, like we were talking about you being in Amsterdam, you were an introvert, and then we talked about introversion and creativity and everything else. So if
no worries.
we want to loop back, we can like get back into like, okay, you're in Amsterdam, you're looking up words in Dutch to try to speak to Dutch people that probably speak English. I can probably guess where that's gonna go in the book. We don't have to give that away, but like that's kind of where we were before I took us down that
Well,
rabbit hole there.
I would say that's probably it for that story, to not get too into that story. And it's pretty an awkward, embarrassing recounting that story. But to go along with the creative aspect, it is daunting to just turn everything off and just close the doors, make sure no dogs or people are coming in and telling everyone, hey, I need this 30 minutes. I need this 3 hours to sit down and just write. And it's always the worst part about writing is just getting to the part where you're just sitting down and doing it. Because we come up with all these like crazy excuses of why we can't do things, like not even just writing, just procrastination in general, just rationalization. And I think it's important to just kind of turn off the mind and kind of just focus, or maybe even do something to pattern disrupt. So I I really didn't do this for the majority of the book, but towards the end when like the deadlines were getting like the word counts were getting bigger and then the deadlines were in shorter time frames, I would do stuff like take a cold shower before just to like kind of just reset my brain completely.
I do that kind of stuff all the time. Super important.
Yes. And yeah, that's probably the hardest part about the creative process is just this being able to deal with the silence.
Can you elaborate a little bit on pattern disruption and like what exactly that means?
So a pattern disruption is just I'm interested in psychology, but I couldn't recount the exact definition of pattern disruption, but basically it's when we're doing a certain act, like I don't know, we're making dinner or something. A pattern disruption is like, this is extreme, but like there's an explosion outside. That's a pattern disruption. It's something that it distracts us, and we might not really have chosen for this distraction, but it can also be something that we impose as well. So like a cold shower, like if my mind's kind of racing and darting all over the place, like thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner or when I'm going to play with a dog or whatever, all this stuff, a pattern disruption just kind of like, it's a way of distracting yourself. It could be good, it could be bad. It's neither. It depends on how you use it.
Yeah, it sounds like if you're using pattern disruption in a positive way, it's almost like a grounding technique. Like,
Yep.
Like that's what I would always do. Like when I want to write, I have to get out of my apartment. I go down to this park.
Okay.
And it's the same. It's like I can repeat the same pattern disruption almost every time. And I know what steps I need to take to put me in a state to do written copy.
Right.
Because I write all of the written copy for all of our clients for Apex. Which is probably why I'm so burnt out and the book is taking a little bit longer because like I'm so burnt out on writing everybody else's stuff that I don't have time to write mine. But I go down and the first thing I do is take off my shoes and stand in the grass because like it immediately just anchors me to that point. Like,
right.
My mind is nowhere else. I am anchored in this spot right here, right now, in this version of reality. Like what I choose to do is what happens next.
Right.
And it's especially prevalent for people, and I'm always a huge advocate for ADHD and bringing it up and talking about it because that's our tendency is to either not focus at all or hyper focus completely on something. And so it's actually, I mean, it's a superpower. Like if you can learn how to put yourself into that state of hyper focus when you need to, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you don't know how and you just believe that you exist in this constant state of chaos and unfocus, then it becomes extremely detrimental. You just end up running in circles and feeling like you're never getting anything done. You're always behind. You're anxious about everything because there's always something you're forgetting. And then you're crippled. And so being able to pattern disrupt is definitely a really cool thing that you were able to incorporate into, like, it sounds like the later stages of writing the book when the deadlines were getting more compressed and you had a little bit more pressure on you.
And something about that as well is pattern disruption and just discipline in general, being able to just unfocus and then focus and not have all the chaos going all over the place in the mind and externally. Being able to impose that discipline on myself has also really helped me to empathize with like loved ones, because I have a lot of loved ones who are very like disorganized and like they always like feel like really busy and all this stuff. And I don't think I was really able to empathize until I really saw that in myself. And then I was able to discipline myself and then look back at the person I largely was. And I still am. I'm very disorganized in a lot of aspects, but I kind of try to use that to my advantage. But being able to step back and look at who I was helps me to see how like the struggles other people are going through with distractions. And I think this, I think I like to call it acedia. It's so that this idea of like this constant distraction, which almost produces a sort of laziness in a way. So like there's the 7 deadly sins and one of them is sloth, but it used to not be called sloth. It used to be called acedia, which was it was a broader term that included laziness, but it also included constant distraction. I think if there is a quote unquote like sin of our times, and this is quoting Jonathan Pajot, who's a YouTuber. Acedia is the sin of our times, where we're constantly distracted and we choose it, and also a lot of the times it's imposed on us. And I can't think of a better example than getting gas at a gas station, and then the little TV starts talking to me and blaring. It's like years ago, we had like older generations would say like dang kids and their phones and everything, always on their smartphones. But now it's like you see those same people like addicted to their phones now, and like the phone is something you can turn off, but like there's a lot of stuff that you can't turn off that's kind of imposed on us externally that we just kind of have to.
The phone is definitely one of the biggest ones. I think that when I was at my peak of anxiety in the middle of COVID and like super depressed, because like I mean, I'm not going to dive too far into that because we'll go way off track. But I realized that my screen time on a daily basis was up to like 11 hours.
Oh, wow.
Something like that, 10 hours a day. It's insane.
Yeah.
And I was justifying it because I'm like, well, I run a social media business. So like I need to be on social media constantly to like see.
Right.
And that's where I came up with this whole consumption versus production idea, because I realized I was not producing anything.
Gotcha.
Like I wasn't being lazy. I was building a business. I mean, I'm not a nurse anymore. I'm not in the military anymore.
Right.
Like I run payroll and we scaled and we did our thing. Right. So it's like, yeah, I was like moving in the right direction on paper, but like internally I had a lot of dissonance because I knew I wasn't performing to the peak of my capability and I couldn't figure out why. And so I was like, where's the disconnect? And then I got my screen time on my phone down to between 2 and 4 hours a day. Just because like, awesome. I mean, I'm constantly checking. I have to constantly be on my email. There's things that I have to check, and it counts my iPad too. So that's kind of my safe zone. But now it's cool because like I've established a metric for myself that like, 2 to 4, if I start to drift above that 2 to 4 hours a day max, I know that I'm off track. And then I know that that's where my creative block is.
Exactly.
Because, and this is a good test for everybody that's listening. If you can't take your phone after 6 p.m. and shut it off for 2 hours without having an anxiety attack, you're addicted to your phone.
Yeah.
You need to figure that shit out. Because if you're experiencing anxiety during the day and you don't know why, everybody's like, well, I should just stop drinking caffeine. I need to take L-theanine and I'm going to like, drink chamomile tea all the time.
Yeah.
Like, or you just get off your phone.
Right.
Like, and they're like, oh, you don't understand why I can't sleep at night. I'm like, well, what's your nighttime routine? They're like, oh, I watch TV. I'm like, no shit.
Less is often the answer, not more.
Yeah. It's so odd to me. And like growing up in a household with my mom, which is like an extreme blessing because like my grandparents, I mean, they remember the barter system in Slovakia after the Soviets left. They had no currency.
Right.
So like growing up with that side of my family, it's like, dude, I would be happy with a shirt that had 4 holes in it and 1 sock. That's just how we were raised.
Yeah,
and like I grew up on a farm. We raised animals. We had our garden. We canned a shit ton. Like we had all of this stuff. And it's like when you realize that sustenance and silence brings the most peace to your soul, that it's not the fancy stuff, not the big TV, it's not going to see the that movie. It's not all of these kind of like they're like the sprinkles on the cake. You know what I mean? Like they're bonuses. I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy them.
Right.
You know, you should go out and enjoy them because we live in an amazing country. You're free to go do that.
Exactly.
And you should totally take advantage of it. But if you're going down this track and you feel yourself spiraling and you're getting more and more anxious, you have no idea why, I almost guarantee that you're probably on your phone too much. And you should probably stop texting and driving because that's like the best place to disconnect is while you're in the car. Just put your phone down. Like, and if you have Google Maps up, just have Google Maps up.
Yeah.
Put on a playlist or just I drive in silence a lot of the time.
Silence is the best. Yeah.
Yeah. Just let your mind wander, daydream, God forbid.
Right. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm not addicted to my phone.
Well, I mean, I think I use the term addicted lightly because I mean, it is an integral part of our culture and our communication system and our society at this point. But I guess to structure it a little bit better, my message would be to look at it as more of a tool of communication, not that digital reality is true reality.
Yeah.
That your physical reality is where reality actually exists, not online. And that item is just a $1,500 tool in your pocket to communicate with other humans.
Right.
But it's also a very good. What was the name of like the conversion of the word sloth?
Acedia.
Acedia. It's a very, very good proponent of that. And it can trap you.
Exactly.
And next thing you know, you spent 3 hours on TikTok and you're like, what the fuck?
Right. Right. Or just think of like, to visualize this, just think of Times Square. It's all these screens, that all these advertisers trying to get your attention. Not trying to rag on marketing or anything, just saying.
Yeah.
It's trying to capture your attention. A million different.
I always tell people, if you're not paying for something, you're the product.
Yeah. I think I've seen you put that on social media or someone else, or I've seen that before, and that I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. If you're not paying for a platform, or if you are the product, and people need to be conscious of that. Right. They're starting to come awake from it because of like documentaries like Social. What was it called?
It wasn't Social Network. It was
no, it was something on Netflix.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I know what you're talking about.
I know it's gonna bug me. Audience, if you know what the name of that is, just I'm sure I'm gonna get texts. We used to talk The Social Dilemma.
Social Dilemma.
That's what it is. Thank God. But yeah, see, it freaking buzzed right there, and I'm like, oh, we're just. But they talk about, I mean, and this is what I really am into with user experience design and marketing and stuff like that is, okay, how do you genuinely form a relationship with that person rather than just try to distract them, steal their attention, and keep them on a platform?
Right.
You know, so it's weird because like I'm a marketer that advocates for people to not be on the platforms that make me money, which doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But I'm like, no, you should empower your audience to be fully themselves and then interact with your brand in a way that educates them, adds value to their life, not just click funnels them into purchasing a product.
Yeah.
You know? But okay, so back to the like
that was a big rabbit hole.
Yeah, big rabbit hole. So I want to try to talk a little bit about like the most important things that you really believe are crucial when it comes to somebody. Like if you met somebody and they were like, hey, I want to try to learn a new language. Like, what are some of the things that you would tell them to help them along their way?
So there's a million different ways to learn a language, but obviously I wrote the book because I wanted to focus on specific things, and I kind of had a hunch that it wasn't going to be as complex as people make it out to be. Like, in high school, oftentimes you spend like 2 or 3 years like learning grammar charts and how to conjugate verbs in Spanish or French or German or whatever. And that's really helpful. You got to know how to conjugate stuff, but that's not really what you should be focusing on. You shouldn't be focusing on random vocabulary like like animals in the zoo and even colors you shouldn't necessarily focus on. But I'll give a few different tips. So I would say the number one thing to learning a language is comprehensive input, and that's kind of a.
Ooh, I love that term.
Yeah,
I'm curious to see what that means.
Right. It's a term that is vague without explanation, but like once I explain it, it'll make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So there's this misconception also that language learning is all just speaking, like practicing speaking.
Yeah.
But it's actually the opposite. It's more so listening, or more broadly, the input that you're receiving. But I'll give an example of a kind of input that you don't want, and then I'll go into what comprehensive input is. So an input you don't want is you're in a foreign country where you don't speak the language at all, and you turn on the radio and you have no idea what they're talking about. That's not how you're going to learn the language by input. Yeah, you're receiving all these words and stuff, but there's nothing to ground you. There's no door wedge. That's a term I use in the book to kind of put your foot in the door and kind of work on like figuring out what the language says. You can kind of do that sometimes by listening. If there's a few words that are shared in English, like if you're watching something on the news about coronavirus or something, that's that's an English word as well. So
Yeah, but then you just know how to say coronavirus with a French accent.
right. Right. So comprehensive input is you're establishing a context. And this is why sitting on the couch and watching foreign dramas on
I was just
Netflix.
about to say, like, I'm thinking the first thing that came to mind after you said radio is like, I wonder if like TV with subtitles.
TV with subtitles is the best. I
Huh.
would suggest, well, it's one of the best, I would say. That I would suggest watching a show in another language, not dubbed in another language, and then
Okay.
have the subtitles also in that language. So you're hearing and then you're also seeing how that's written. So you can kind of like make that connection as well.
Yeah.
But the most important part is the context. So, like I said, like listening to the radio is not going to help very much if you don't know any of the words.
Right.
But if you're watching like a Japanese drama and there's a birthday party going on, you don't need to know any Japanese to know that a birthday is going on. Like if you see like a baby and there's a cake in front of the baby with a candle that says number 1, you can kind of fill in the gaps. And that's how language is learned. Is you just think of like a baby. Is a baby studying grammar textbooks? Are they conjugating verbs? No, what a baby does is they babble, and I can talk about that because that's also important. But
It's a really, really important. It's actually really, really cool how they
crucial.
go through the
Yes.
process of basically making every single phonetically available sound to the human
Yeah.
race, and then
Exactly
just
right.
narrow it down based on their inputs.
Right.
It makes total sense. I mean, like everything you're saying is it's just mind blowing that I'm like haven't put the 2 and 2 together. It's
Right.
another reason why you should get the book and read it because you know that's coming from somebody that is already bilingual, and like I want to pick it up and read it now.
Mhm.
Continue. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah. So, like a baby, you can watch a show of a baby having their birthday party, but think about from the baby's perspective. A baby doesn't learn the word birthday and cake and number 1 or 1 years old from reading it in like a little picture book. That comes later. The baby learns it just by hearing it and then seeing these things performed. I think humans understand things in narrative.
Yeah.
And context is really important for narrative. So when you bind the language and actions of things happening around you, I mean that's really how you learn language. So a lot of people also have a hunch that immersion, like studying abroad, is one of the best ways to learn a language, and it is pretty good. It's really good, but it's not the immersion itself that's what's causing you to learn the language. It's that smaller concept of comprehensive input. You're comprehending the input because you're acting things out. You kind of have to, if you're practicing a phrase, you're not just practicing it to yourself. You're going and getting a coffee from the coffee shop in Italy or something. It's
That's really. I mean, it's
real
I
world
also
feedback.
want to like compare it to so something that my audience may not know, or at least I haven't talked about in a long time. But like I fought in the Golden Gloves in Cleveland in 2016, took home a belt, and
Is that
so, like,
jiu-jitsu?
boxing.
Boxing. Okay.
Yeah, and then I also roll jiu-jitsu though.
Awesome.
I do that every Thursday. But boxing, like my trainer used to make me watch these fight clips of old fighters, but they would pause every now and then and just like explain like this is where his calf is, like this is the toe pointing, like this is this is where his weight was shifting, and like all of this stuff. And I would sit and he would make me watch these tapes like hours before I would come into the gym, and then he would make me apply it.
Okay.
And it's almost like, I mean, it's the same concept, right? That you're giving yourself. We have these interesting things inside of our brains called mirror neurons, which allow us to essentially watch something, and the same area that lights up when you do a physical act,
right,
lights up when you observe that same physical act.
Right.
So you're actually kind of neuroplastically giving your brain the highway for that information to actually travel. Because I feel like if people jump too far into immersion too quickly,
Hmm.
they have the inputs, but the inputs don't have any roads to go down. And like you almost
Right.
have to wake up those parts of your brain to put yourself into a neuroplastic state
Hmm.
to allow the brain to actually absorb the information. Is that kind of on point, or am I totally off the ball?
That I don't know too much about the mirror neurons, but definitely the imitation and everything you just said. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But you don't want to go full immersion, and you also don't want to do strictly comprehensive input. There are ways you do if you want to learn a language to fluency. You don't have to open a book ever,
Right.
but it's helpful. It can be really helpful, especially if you are learning vocabulary. And here, probably the second most important tip, and it's kind of this one's not as I would say universal because different languages have different amounts of vocabulary.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what the second most important thing is to uh, memorize the 1,000 most spoken words,
Mhm.
or even less. Like you can even get away with 300. And the reason you want to do the most frequently used words, most common words in that language, and this is kind of crazy, but 25% of all the words spoken in any language is typically less than 10 words. So, like in any given sentence, you're saying, or 25% of the time, you're saying the same 10 words. So that would be like common things like I, be, to, me, you, stuff like that, that you have to use always.
Oh, yeah, on a regular basis. That
Right.
makes sense. Yeah.
And yeah, so most language, I think it's kind of like the 80-20 principle. You know that you know a very small minority of the language total vocabulary, but if you memorize that small minority, that's your door wedge. That's how you get into the door. That's how you able to ask questions and understand
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I think is like really, really important about all the stuff that you're kind of laying out for people, outside of just the comprehensive inputs or these tips and everything like that, is that it's really difficult for people to approach a new task if it's amorphous.
Mm.
If they have no a lot of and I definitely personally struggle with this. A lot of people with ADHD struggle with this a lot. But just people in the normal world, they struggle with identifying the steps by which to reach a
Mm.
process or goal.
Gotcha.
As something that I talk about in entrepreneurship all the time,
Hmm.
where it's like, you have this vision. 'Cause
Right.
I always say an entrepreneur generally just gets like smacked. Like, right. They're just like, boom, here it is. Like
Right.
they get to this idea. For some people, um, it's like some calling that they didn't expect. For other people, it's an opportunity that popped up that they seized. For
Hmm.
other people, it's like being shoved into it for like no other reason than the world just shit on them and they
Yeah.
need to figure something out to survive. But there's always this point where they just kind of get shoved into it. And the hardest part is like having the vision of like I knew 4 years ago that I wanted to own a company. I had
Hmm.
no idea what it needed to be. I just knew deep down in my gut, I had this intuitive impulse that I wanted to own a company. And so over time, I started realizing there's more and more people that just like they wanted to go down this path. I had no idea how to get there. So I developed a framework called I call it the 4 I's.
Mm.
So it's intuition, imagination, interpretation equals identity.
Okay.
And so like you start with an intuitive impulse, you imagine all the potential pathways, solutions.
Okay.
You use all of the data that you have available to yourself to
Hmm.
interpret the imaginative possibilities
Hmm.
and narrow that down, pick one, and that becomes identity, right? And so it like once I started teaching people that and they were like, "Oh, there's actually a process to this.
Hmm.
It's not just blind intuition leading me down a rabbit hole."
Right.
I'm like, "Yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense." So like the beautiful thing about what you were able to put together for languages is like it's no longer this massive Leviathan-esque
Right.
amorphous thing that they're trying to approach, and the only thing they have
Hmm.
available is Duolingo. It's like,
Right.
no,
Right.
here's a set of processes. Here's ways that you can put yourself into a state to actually absorb this information in a positive way
Hmm.
and maybe make your journey a little bit easier.
Right. Right. And oftentimes having a bad plan is better than having no plan.
Preach.
Yeah. And so what you just said with like the 4 I's that took me back to high school. senior year statistics. This, I don't know if this is exactly the same idea, but the acronym cow outside of an Alaskan igloo. So that's collect, organize, analyze, interpret. I think that's right. Yeah. That's what you do in statistics. And it sounds similar to what you just laid out.
Yeah. And basically where that was birthed is just like, I'm passionate about the scientific method. I'm passionate about finding objectivity and removing yourself from the data. Like I'm passionate about data, but I'm also an empath. And so I realized that like empathy disrupts data.
Right.
So what I always say is like, you can't have empathy be a part of the data gathering process, but you can have empathy on what you choose to do with that data after you find it. But data has to be objective. And so I was like, if that has to be objective, then I have to be able to find a process for these people that are struggling internally to identify something that's emotional. And so I called it, it's called empirical empathy.
Okay.
Is what I ended up coining it as. But it's super fascinating that like those same types of principles that are based in here's how you identify a new identity for yourself in reality are the exact, or they're very similar to the statistics principles. They're very similar to the same types of principles that you're talking about in being able to acquire a language. It's like a universal law, essentially, just applied in different areas of life.
And this just popped in my head, but that's also kind of like what you do with writing. It's you try to make an overabundant amount of writing. You just write, and then you call it, you cut it down, and then you and then you look at once you're done writing that and you've cut it down, you kind of analyze it, and then you rework it, and then you, well, I guess you wouldn't do the interpreting, but whoever would be reading your writing would be doing the interpreting.
Right. Well, and sometimes the interpretation needs to be an outside force. You know what I mean? For us, a lot of times interpretation is the AI. Like we intuit with a client and then we imagine a bunch of potential solutions. We plug it into an algorithm and then we see, okay, which one of these potential solutions is going to become our output. And that's where AI is really valuable. And what people are misconceiving is they're jumping intuition and imagination, going straight to interpretation. They're skipping two crucial parts of the puzzle because they're like, oh, well, I already have the answers. I just need to interpret and make the answer better.
They need to test it.
And my challenge is, are you even trying to solve the right problem?
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how many people we work with, whether it's businesses or personal brands or anybody, where I'm like, you're solving the wrong problem. You're like spending money. Some people are spending tens of thousands of dollars running in the wrong direction. And then we come in and we're like, okay, we use the intuitive piece. It's like, you called us here for a reason. Intuitively, you know something's wrong.
Right.
What are those bells and whistles going off in your gut? Right. We start there rather than just jumping straight to the data that they have.
Right.
That data is useless if it's in the wrong direction.
Right.
And so it's almost like with the language piece, it's like, if you jump straight to whether it's, I know some people are like, well, you should listen to podcasts in other languages and other stuff like that. It's like the radio, right? And so like if you Google stuff and it shows you Duolingo and all these other things, because those people pay to get in front of your face.
Exactly.
They dump a lot of money to make you believe that is the best possible, that you need them.
Right.
And you don't. Like the human brain is so beautiful. If you know how to treat it well, then you can do a lot of stuff, without a lot of these apps. Like humans existed for thousands of years without apps,
right?
And we're able to become bilingual.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's what I like. I'm super excited about the book. Is like, hey, like here's a way you have all of the tools available.
Exactly. Yep.
You just need to figure out how to use them. You're like you're instructing people on how to take the hammer and build a house.
And a lot of what drives me more generally is kind of looking at how it is people are living now, specifically Americans, because I mean, I'm American, and seeing how we live now, and then seeing how is it that most humans have lived for most of human history, and then see what are we doing correct now, but also what are all the things that we're doing wrong? Because I mean, I love science, and that's part of the focus of my YouTube channel is science and like inquiry and curiosity and all that. And science has obviously given us a lot of amazing material advantages that has pushed forth the human race
Right.
materially, but there's also a lot of things we don't understand about our world or even ourselves because there's like this, I think there's this ethos in Western culture that um, old things are bad in the sense of old things are nice to look at, but the ideas of ancient people are wrong because it's XYZ, or ancient people didn't know what they were talking about because, whatever, fill in the blank. But I think a lot of wisdom and I think a lot of successful people look to those ancient.
We should just have an entire podcast about like the evolution of consciousness from ancient civilization now. Because, like, that's something that I think you would really love. This I work with a group or a guy named Jarrett Dreschel.
Okay.
And he has a podcast called Soul of Jarrett. And this dude is,
I just followed him on Instagram today.
yeah, he's super cool dude, right? He's like the embodiment of a hippie. But his whole thing is that we've gotten so far away from attempting to understand our internal state,
right?
That it's a big reason why everybody's in a constant existential crisis, because they're not spending any time understanding who they are.
Right.
They're defining themselves by what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a mistake to believe that a civilization of humans that's capable of building the Mayan Empire, they had indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're not stupid.
No.
They were extremely intelligent beings that they just hadn't been on the planet long enough to have the tools that we have.
Right.
That's literally the only reason, and they had very complex languages. They had calendars. They had they learned. I think I would argue almost they were more creative and ingenious than we are now, because they figured out how to do stuff with clay and like cutting holes in the sides of buildings so that at certain times of the year the light would shine through, and they know exactly when to do stuff based off of the elements. Like, that's taming nature at that raw of a level is absolutely fucking insane to me.
Exactly.
And like, now we're all posh. I'm sitting on a couch on the 12th floor of a building in downtown Canton, and like everybody's just constantly distracted. Like, it makes me so sad when somebody is like, oh, I Googled something and I didn't find any results, so it must be wrong. I'm like, no, you Googled something, you didn't find any results. Thank God.
Yeah.
You had a creative, original thought.
Right.
Recognize that for the gift that it is. Come on. Like, So yeah, I would love to have you back just to talk about that whole rabbit hole, because I mean, somebody that's, interested in history and also understands a lot of this intercultural stuff and fascinated with language. I'd like to try to get us into a place where we're going to end up being able to see ourselves out here in like 20 minutes, half hour. And so like, there's this quote that you have in there that you mentioned inside of like the pre-bio that's been bugging me all day. Because I really want to know what your perspective of it is. And it's, to know another language is to possess another soul. Why that quote?
So in one of the first chapters of the book, I wanted to kind of get I wanted to kind of collect like data, like you're saying, by looking at what other people said. And I believe that quote is Charlemagne, right?
Yep. Not Charlemagne the God, by the way.
Right. And quick fun fact about Charlemagne is that we actually don't know what language he spoke, but
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
But why I chose that quote, it was one of many of a bunch from all sorts of cultures around the world that were basically saying the same thing. So in the book, I have like Czech proverbs, Chinese proverbs, Iranian proverbs, African proverbs, and all these different cultures that really had no contact when these quotes came about, talking about how having another language is to possess another soul. It's to I can't remember the one quote, but it's something like it's to walk down a hallway and have all the doors open or something like that, or have the door open to a different door open. Same idea. Like it's the reason I chose that, because I think it's so fascinating that in America we're like the most prosperous country in the world in a lot of regards, but we can't communicate with our neighbors, our southern neighbors, and we can't communicate with the French Canadians who are also our neighbors.
It's also like it saddens me that people are mind blown when an American can speak another language. They're
Mm.
like it's baffling to them
Yeah.
when an American can speak another language. And it seems like every other country that they would go to, they're just like, "What do you mean you don't speak my language? Like
Hmm.
you haven't learned my language?"
Right, right.
And but it's like we're definitely at the bottom of that totem pole, I think,
Mm.
when it comes to like the expectation of our level of knowledge of other people's cultures, because it's part of what's kept us alive for 250 years is we have this extremely deep rooted sense of patriotism.
Hmm.
But my argument would be like, just because you're patriotic doesn't mean that you shouldn't want to open all the doors in that hallway if you get the chance.
Right, right. Right, and a lot of the founding fathers knew many languages. I think Thomas Jefferson knew 7 languages, and Old English was one of them.
Yeah.
And that's a hard enough language to learn now. I couldn't imagine how hard it would be to find the books and everything to learn that then. But back to the quote, um, like you're saying, it kind of like it opens the doors and allows you to see other cultures like for who they are. I think there's a misconception in learning languages that it's just one to one. This word means this word. It's not like that. Like even the word of in English, in a language that's related, French, you would use the word de. That's you can't use that the same way in the way you use that in English. You can use it also as the word from and other things. And that's just a very basic example. But the every culture and every language has concepts that only you can really truly know if you speak that language, but more so if you're from that culture or if you're immersed in that culture. And there's all sorts of words in different languages that um, can't be translated. And I actually
Mm.
have
Mm.
I have a pretty long appendix to my book. Just one thing in there is like a language worksheet to help you find out your goals and everything. But another thing is I have like a mini dictionary of words in other languages that cannot be translated to English or other languages.
Mm.
And I also
Mm.
have a shorter section of words in English that can't be translated to other
Yeah.
languages.
Yeah. I was just talking about that with I can't remember who it was. It doesn't really matter. But I was just talking about how limiting the English language is when it comes to describing our internal state.
Mm.
Like there are not a whole lot. Like there are words in Indian. There are words in even Slovak, um, and a lot of other languages that are really really good at describing non-materialistic reality.
Mm.
The English language sucks at it.
Yes. Do you know the word litost? I think it's Czech, but Czech and Slovak are mutually intelligible.
I don't know if I know that word.
I can't remember exactly what it
Litos.
means, but yeah, that's one of the words I put in the book because it's one of those ones you just can't translate.
Yeah, and it's like I can't think of a specific example. I was just reading about a specific word because I've been doing a lot of research into like chakras and different like levels of the soul according to like yoga mentalities and
Gotcha.
other things along those lines. And they have a lot of words that describe like um different planes of existence
Mm.
that you have to come to understand about yourself in order to fully understand all the different pieces of yourself.
Right.
And like the English language, like we don't have anything like that. It's very mechanical. It's very, um, you know, uh, it's very good at describing kind of like the STEM fields.
Yes.
You know
And
what I mean?
to kind of interject on that point, I don't think it's necessarily English in general that doesn't have it. I think it's English has lost a lot of words.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of words in English, and I actually have this down for a video I want to make about words that are in English and are used but really aren't used. So like
Yeah.
we might use the word vice, like someone has their vice or whatever, but we don't really use the words like virtue or honor and like even
Have you ever heard of the word sonder?
sonder. I have. Well, I'm not sure what that is.
Well, so it's like it's a word that describes the feeling of existential awareness, not crisis,
Okay.
but existential awareness of that, like me sitting here right now, I'm experiencing Sonder because I'm talking to another human and I'm intimately understanding that they are living a life that is just as intimately complex with as
Right.
many variables as my life has. And I have respect for that degree of interaction, right? Like I'm
Right.
not just looking at another person and I'm sitting and, looking at this as a mechanical interview where we're having a conversation and we're recording
Yeah.
things, but it's like understanding when all of that blows out that like everybody around you, around the world, and then it continues to grow. It's like everybody is living these intimately complex realities and they're all slightly different, but they all exist in the same timeline. That's Sonder.
Right.
And
Okay.
that's an example of a word that describes a really metaphysical concept,
Yeah.
just is not used
Right.
at all.
Russian, I think it's Russian, has a word called, I think it's trosk or triosk or something like that. And I couldn't even give you the full definition because I had to look up a bunch of different definitions and they all said slightly different things because you just can't explain it. And it was kind of like this existential dread, or it's like this.
Sounds Russian.
Yeah, it's a very deep, like sadness for a yearning of something you can never have.
Messed up shit.
Yeah.
Like I have a lot of friends that are Russian. I swear to God, they smile like 4 times total. And it's just like, it's funny that that's the word that popped to mind when it came to describing like a Russian word that's untranslatable is like existential dread.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just read like the well-known authors like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and
Dostoevsky is the best. If nobody,
Solzhenitsyn.
if people haven't read Solzhenitsyn or Dostoevsky, they need to. 100%. They'll understand so much more about life in general. That and then like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is another one that I recommend all the time.
I haven't read that yet, but that's definitely on the list.
It's highly recommended. He talks about like one of my favorite chapters is he spends a chapter talking about the impact of humor at the subhuman level.
Okay.
Like when everything else is stripped away, you're butt naked being beat by guards, treated like cattle.
Right.
That humor still exists,
Yes.
and how wild that is.
Yeah.
That it's such a deep rooted part of what makes you human.
Yeah.
That humor exists in even the darkest of abysses.
Yeah.
And I carry that with me wherever I go. So it's like it's kind of like it like a way insane version of Always a Silver Lining is like humor is such an integral piece of who we are as people that it should be paid attention to.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, humor is absolutely necessary. And this is just kind of me thinking out loud, but I'm wondering if humor and humility are like cognate, like meaning they have the same origin. I'm sure they do, and that would make sense because, I mean, I'm just kind of making this up, but like humility is like a lowering of oneself, but humor is kind of like what goes in like the abyss, the lowest part, and like elevates you out.
It's not just an elevation of self, but it's an elevation of a collective. So it's like that would like humility would be like you lowering yourself down to accept the fact that like you are humorous, you're able to lift up the collective as well. That would be interesting. I'd be curious to look into that and see if they are actually related.
Right.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to have you back for another conversation. I'm sure the audience will want to have you back because I think there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about. I want them to continue to get to know, like I said, the kind of the person behind the book, less the book itself. But speaking of the book and everything like that, going to be published in like the next couple of weeks.
Yep.
And if people want to try to find you or they want to try to find information about the book, like where are good places for people to go to do that?
So for the book is called To Speak is to See, Guide to the Dual Literate Generation, and it will be available on Amazon as an ebook and paperback. The paperback's $14.99. Ebook, first few weeks will be 99 cents. So go get that while you can. And so that'll be on Amazon and I believe Kobo and Ingram Spark. You can also find me on YouTube. So Edamos Max on YouTube.
You spell that for everybody, just so they know. ETYMOS and then space Max. I should come up one of the first things on YouTube. And then I'm
going to try to have a podcast associated with that as well.
Mm.
You can find me on Instagram, Taco versus Sushi, Taco vs and then Sushi. And then I also have another account on Instagram that centers on like masculinity and faith and stuff like that. And it's called Of Sun and Con. So that's of dot sun dot and dot con. So KHAN. So you can find that on Instagram. And yeah, that's primarily where I'm at.
Sick, man. Well, cool. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem, man. I appreciate you you bearing with me as I had a very, very hectic last month.
Gotcha.
And being able to get the time to actually sit down and record this. It's been a pleasure.
Right. Absolutely.
Cool,
Good
man.
to be here.
Till next time, keep chasing your apex.